Welcome back to the Octopus Movement podcast. This is our sanctuary for nonlinear minds where we celebrate unconventional thinkers and tap into their unique power to change the world. I'm your host today, Isis Fabian, and I am so excited to be here with another founding member, Axelle Manfrini. Axelle is an image maker, photographer, creative director, photo retoucher, originally from France, now living in Portugal. Axelle, thank you so much for being here. Who knows where we're going to go today?
We'll see.
Just tell us, in whatever words make sense to you, or take whatever direction you want, how does nonlinear thinking shape what you do?
So as I was explaining to you, I have a fantasia. So for me, it's very important because it's something I realized quite late, actually, but it's kind of funny because as an image maker, you would think I'm a visual thinker. You would think I could visualize things in my head, but it's actually the opposite. So if I close for those people who don't know what a fantasia is, if I close my eyes and I'm trying to visualize something, I see absolutely nothing. It's pitch black. So when I think that when people say that, oh, you can count the sheep when you're trying to sleep, like always thought it was like a metaphor, and some people are actually capable of this. I'm like, wow, okay. So for me, aphantasia is as I said, important because the way I work with photography is more like I'm using photography to see. Because it's my least dominant sense. And as I said, I went to see a hypnotherapist, and she was like, oh, you might be a visual thinker since you're a photographer. And I'm like, I don't think I am. And they do this exercise where they ask you to visualize a scene, like, for example, a beach or a forest or something. And they ask you to describe it. And she told me that basically I use no visual adjectives at all, so except colors. I'm like really into colors, which is the only visual clue that I would give describing a scene. So I use photography more like a tool for me to apprehend the world visually.
Wow, I love that. Apprehend the world visually. How does that affect, you said vision is your least dominant sense. So does that affect your relationship with your other senses, with smell, with sound, with touch? Do you feel more tapped into those, or what's your experience there?
Funny enough, I think it affects my memory more than anything else.
Wow.
My memory is not visual. So I would mostly remember words or space somehow, like
Mm-hmm.
a sense of space. When I'm like if I'm trying to recall my childhood home, I would remember the feeling of the vibe of the space, or like just the spatiality of the rooms, and how you go from the corridor to the bedrooms and back and forth. So yeah, I think I have a strong sense of space in general.
Wow, that is so interesting. 'Cause now I'm like going through childhood memories and realizing the visual aspect is often a distraction, at least for me, from a lot of like that more the vibration, the texture, the almost like the not the color of it, but just like the weight of it. Like there's all these other features to our memories and to our experiences that are not have nothing to do with being visual, but we're probably conditioned and acculturated to ignore those and only look at the visual and have that stand alone. How did you discover that this is different for you?
Well, as I say, through the hypnotherapy, that kind of was confirming something that I felt was true. And yeah, just I think in general, it's as I say, I use photography as a tool for memory, I guess, because I'm very bad with faces,
Me
and
too.
if my way of recalling faces is much more easy for me to recall faces if I took a photograph of them, because I got to see like a fixed version where I can sort of analyze a face and sort it in my head much more easily than in a live setting.
I have the same thing that it's a version of prosopagnosia, right? Where it's easier to like I can't recognize faces unless I've had enough time to see them and memorize like the distance between their eyes, the shape of the bridge of their nose. I'll think of it as like a little like squiggle that exists kind of on its own out in space. And I realize I'm much more intimately familiar with the shapes of all these people's faces and my husband's friends and these different people than they ever are. Like I ask him, like, can you imagine like the shape of this friend's nose. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so there's that fusiform gyrus apparently is the part of the brain that can just picks up faces. It's a thing that it does by itself. I guess mine doesn't work. But same thing. If I have a picture of someone for a while, I'll be thinking of the picture. I'm like, and I try to compare them to the picture. If I don't have a picture and they change their outfit or they cut their hair, then it's a
then you're doomed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing for me as well because, as I say, I'm also a retoucher and I'm good at editing. I spend a lot of time selecting the photos that I want to use and retouching them and everything. So this time really helps with the memory factor.
Wow. Yeah. And that's something, having face blindness. We could talk for 30 minutes about how that affects someone's life. But let's move on for now. What else? Tell us more about your photography. You say you use photography to see. What is kind of unique about your relationship to the camera and the way you set up a photo, given this very different mind that you have?
I wrote actually a whole dissertation in school because I think for me, photography is not so much like a painting. I think a lot of people make this sort of comparison with painting, but I think for me it's more like sculpting because you have a space and you just go around the space, seeing how the light interfere with the space, and you sort of select a bit of the space. So for me, it's the act of taking a photography. It's much more embodied than just visual. And it's a good thing because like when I did like a few shootings where it's like 10 hours shoots, at the end I'm exhausted and I barely can see anything because my vision is getting blurred. But I'm just so used to the sort of physical memory, muscle memory of taking photos that I get sort of still I'm able to continue and push on, even though my sight is not that good at that point.
Wow. So what are you trying to capture when you're capturing a photo? I know it's a really hard question.
I think there's two steps to working with photography, and there are two very important and distinct steps. It's the taking of the photography, and it's then the selecting of the photography. And so when you take photography, you just like I guess of course I could direct people, but I'm also trying to get something that's spontaneous sometimes as well. So it's not something that's so much planned. Often when you have this idea, like, okay, I have this idea of what I want in my head, and then you come to the shoot and you try to get it and it's not working, and then you're like, let's move on, because it's never going to be exactly what you sort of feel or want, because it's more about a mood or an expression or something like that. And then you just continue on with the shoot, and in the end, when you do the editing, selecting is the most important part, because I think it's such an underrated part of the job of photographers, especially from people who don't know much about photography. They don't realize how editing is important. I think we're used to like having so many images of us that like I know that when clients come to me for portraits, for example, they expect me to give 50 photos. I'm like, that's a mistake. That's not right. I think like a good portrait photo shoot should be around 5 to 10 tops, depending on the goal of the shoot, of course. But honestly, 5 good photos that you take the time to really think like, what this photo mean? What is this expression? What's are you trying to say with the image? It's really, really important. And I don't participate to the sort of photographer who just send like a bunch of images without recommendation or without guidance for which photo are the best ones.
Wow. There's a little bit off that topic, but we did get a question in the chat for you asking if you have vivid dreams. I assume you don't have visuals in your dreams, but you still have dreams.
Funny enough, I do.
Oh, wow.
Funny enough, I do. And this is how I know I have aphantasia, because some it's a spectrum, aphantasia. When I'm awake, I'm very much in the no image at all. But when I sleep, and especially like when you sort of have this sort of between awake and sleeping, sometimes I do have visuals, which is like, oh, this I can't have if I'm awake, but in this stage I can see things. So it's yeah, it's quite interesting.
But do you have dreams that have like a plot to them? Like you wake up from like you're completely asleep and you remember, oh, this happened in my dream, that happened in my dream, this person was there, I was in that place. Do you have dreams like that?
My dreams are really, really surreal. It's kind of funny enough that I almost never dream of the people who are closest to me. If I dream of someone I know, which is not the case most of the time, it's not necessarily someone that's really close.
Hmm.
And most of the time, I'm not even myself. Sometimes I'm not just one person, I could be 5 person. Sometimes at the same time, it makes no sense, but I can have taste. I can have sound and taste and smells. And when sometimes I do have a bit of sleep paralysis,
Paralysis, yeah.
but it's a lot more non-visuals than most people. So I'm lucky enough not to see demons or anything like this. It's just like pitch black. So it feels a bit less stressful, I guess.
Wow, that's as I told you before we started, like as someone who's a very active dreamer and lucid dreamer, to hear your kind of experience of it. I mean, it's the same thing. I have that same thing where sometimes I'm alone, sometimes I'm five people. But the way it happens in a visual world is like you're a group of people kind of moving around, and you might not notice unless you're a very practiced, dreamer, that you are kind of functioning as a 5 person or 10 person group. But for someone like you, because you can think in that more surreal and abstract way, you just kind of like experience it more for what it is and less of the visual illusion. At least that's how I hear it. So thank you for sharing that. I know it's not what we're here to talk about, but
No,
really
but one of
fascinating.
my favorite book is actually a book that's written by Boris Vian, who's a French surreal poet, writer, and musician as well, and I guess octopus as well, probably. And it's all surreal. Like it makes no sense if you try to transcribe it in a visual way. It's probably. I mean, I know they did a movie about it, but I refused to watch it for this reason. I think that the surreal, how surreal it is, I don't think it could transcribe so well in images.
Wow. So that's a really good point, though. Being able to think that way. When everything's visual, it's also very separated, right? Like there's very distinct separation between things, and you have to make things very concrete and very defined, right? And when you can think and imagine without there being a visual component, I imagine that removes some of the um just some of the barriers or the constrictions on imagination to be able to do that. That's really fascinating. I'm curious, I mean, even photography as a gateway, right, to the world beyond words. I think words are another thing that we can really like constrict our reality with, like describing things with words. I know
Mhm.
photography is just one form of visual art, but when you think about kind of grasping beyond that, the visualized, the put into words, like what are the things that you are grasping with your photography, or is it evoking emotions? Like what are the is it space?
Yeah, I like to try at least to get something that you can't really put words to.
Right.
I think some people, I don't know who said that, but the photography is worth 1,000 words.
Right.
But I like the idea of like there is something behind the photography that you can not really put your finger to, like what's you could feel like there is an intent. Like I'm really trying to find photos where there is this sort of work about identity, but the fact that identity is very fluid and abstract, and I'm really believe that we tend to have a sort of closed mindset when it comes to our identity. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm a multiple. I'm not one thing. Like an octopus. Obviously, it should resonate with the community on here. Like I'm not one thing. I'm so much three-dimensional, and that words are amazing. I love the fact that you can really restrict and really get. It's very important to choose the right words to vehiculate one idea, but it's a construct, and I like the photography that you can just sort of try to deconstruct the identity or the feelings, or trying to get something more complex than a simple idea.
And they can evoke completely different things for different people, depending on the kind of lenses and everything that they're showing up with. I think the idea of kind of containing multitudes is definitely really common for non-linear thinkers. And from an identity standpoint, we talk about like femininity, masculinity, gender identity, all of these things, and not to mention, you know, race and age and all these other ways that we create these very clear delineations and boxes and constructs, and like, what do they mean to us? We come from these boxes, or you walk out in the world knowing you're being perceived as, you know, a member of that box, whether you identify with other people in that box or not. It's a very, I think the experience of being perceived and navigating all of that, I hear come up over and over again for nonlinear thinkers of all types. I don't know if that's something that you ever think about, the perception question. Yeah. What have you learned about your own mind while creating your art?
I think it's kind of funny because I did submit to some panels my work in general. It's kind of interesting to have a feedback that is external, because I think I over intellectualize my practice. But then when someone else look at it, they might get something completely different that I would not see. So for me, it's kind of interesting because I sent it to a panel of professionals, and they sort of come back to similar ideas that I did not necessarily plan on or thought about when I was doing my portfolio, but ideas of longing. And so I think it's interesting because I think the photos I choose say more about me sometimes than the subject I'm taking a photo of.
Yeah.
So a sense of longing and identity is very strong. The questioning, I think that they whether I'm taking a photo of a woman, a man, a musician, a random person, a model, or anything, I think even though I'm trying to say something about them, I'm also saying something about me. And I think it's a way to connect for me.
And do you all know what you're saying? I always wonder this with photographers. Do you know what that thing is that you're saying? Like, you have a clear idea of it, or you just feel it? You're like, this is a feeling. It feels like I've captured it properly, but there's no way to really define it. And it's just a question of, does someone else react to it?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because often the first of the last image is the right one. And I can't explain it, but it's like sometimes you meet someone, it's like I'm taking a photo, and that's almost like the first one is like, okay, I'm not stopping there. Usually I push a bit forward. I'm like, I think I have it. I don't know why we have time, so we're going to continue, but I think I have it. And sometimes it's like you need time to just try to connect with the subject, so they can relax as well. Maybe like they need to understand that you have their best interests at heart, and then you want them to feel comfortable because you want them to look good and be happy with the photo. And it takes some time and process to understand. It's sort of like a dance, basically. And the last image is the good one, and I'm just stopping there, and I'm like, sometimes I do know, oh, I have it, we can stop. But sometimes it's like, well, we've been at it for a long time. We have plenty of good ones. I'm sure we have plenty of good ones. But maybe I'm not feeling this feeling specifically. So it really depends on the project, the person, the goal of the images, all of that.
Yeah. It's kind of something you experience right away too, right? It's like you see the image that's been captured, and it's like you need to sit there and analyze it for 10 minutes to know if it's good or bad, right? Like you kind of, I don't know, I feel like our reactions to an image, to a photo, even to a piece of art, often there's like an immediate feeling about it, and you know it's there or it's not. What about other beyond, because you don't just do photography, right? I mean, you edit images, you create images in other ways. Like what other kinds of art do you do, and how do you think about those?
I do retouching, which I consider more like a technical skill than necessarily creative, because I'm not the client, so it's not like I can do whatever I want. I'm still following a brief.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting because I think people have a preconception about what photo editing is, And if I told them like the photo that took me the longest time to retouch was a bottle of perfume, and they're like, oh, you're making people skinny. No, sometimes I make them rounder because they might seem underweight, and you have the bones that's not super, not depending on the client obviously, but usually it's a request we have to maybe hide if they're a bit underweight or things like that. So it's not all about I want to make people skinny and have issues with their body image or anything like that. Sometimes it's as I said, still life takes the longest almost to edit than anything else. And also, like, if you imagine I'm taking a portrait of a model that's going to be printed, on a billboard, nobody looking at you with the magnifying glass, looking at all the pores in real life. But when you're printed as big as a building, obviously editing is appreciated, at least because it's not reflecting the reality, how we look at people anyway.
Right.
And I could go on about the ethic of retouching and for a long time actually, but if you have any more questions.
But I like that concept of like you're altering reality to create a better, more accurate reflection of our subjective reality, right? It's like Tim O'Brien wrote the Things They Carried. It's a novel, about the Vietnam War, but he talks about this concept of like storytelling truth. He actually fought in the Vietnam War. The book reads like a memoir, but he says it's a novel. He's like, he says that he writes the stories in that book to evoke the feeling in the reader that is most accurate to what he experienced in the Vietnam War. But as a reader who's never been to war, who doesn't understand so many aspects of that experience, he feels he has to tell a fictionalized version to evoke the correct feelings, the true feelings, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if he told the literal truth, it wouldn't evoke the true feelings. And ever since I read that book and read that concept, I feel like you see it everywhere. I think about it all the time. It's the same thing that you're describing, right? It might be the literal picture that's unedited that goes up on the billboard, but is it portraying the true experience of standing across from someone, or how you would see somebody's makeup or whatever it is that's on display? No, it's you have to change it to make it actually come across that way. It's just interesting.
No matter how beautiful someone can be, like, you're focusing on their sort of essence.
Right,
when you're seeing them, like, they're living beings, and so when they're smiling big, of course they will have like some tiny details, like, but if you put it in a photo, it's different feeling all of a sudden.
Do you find that because you spend so much time behind the camera and because you have aphantasia, that you have less attachment to visuals, like, of yourself or to your own appearance or to your own, like, what is your relationship to just your own aesthetics and fashion and all of that?
It's for sure, it's make me aware that complex makes no sense in a way. Like, everybody, like, even the most beautiful models sometimes have like ugly feet, or there's always something, nobody's perfect. So there is that. So that I'm like, oh, they're all human beings, so I'm a human being too. And so it allows me just to relax a bit, I guess, about the body image in general. But I think that you can have someone that's absolutely beautiful in person, and then you take a photo, and it's a much more difficult process. I think being photogenic is a thing. I don't think I'm photogenic, but I'm okay with that. I'm just like, I'm gonna let it, I'm dropping it. And you can have someone who in real life you won't look twice, and then you take a photo of them and just they look incredible. So there is this phrase that I really love about art, but I think it's mostly applying to photography. It's a lie that tells the truth as well. So it's a construct you have to build somehow to get through a feeling that might be genuine, but it's still a construct. You'll still spend hours doing the makeup, the lights, then choosing the right photo, the right angle, the right everything, just to capture something that's true about the person. But it's all it's an artifice. It's all fake. It's all constructed. It's all, but you're getting to something that's genuine. That the goal is still something genuine.
I'm gonna remember that forever. A lie that tells the truth. Like, that is such an amazing way to describe it. It's like you're crafting like a little window to look through and see something true, but everything surrounding it is completely artificial or has been, wrought into that place or moved there or manipulated just to create that experience of you accessing something true. I mean, what do you feel like are some of the true things that are best accessed through photography or visual art in general?
Well, actually, it's kind of funny because photography is tricky because people already sort of think it's the truth, but it's the step before they don't realize the artifice and the construct that sort of like disappear because now images are just taken as document of reality, and I think that's not the case. That should not be the case. I think it's like it's really, I think, as I said, like people think photography is the truth. I think they forget it's artificial.
Wow, it's almost like a quantum physics and quantum mechanics, right? Like the observation of a particle changes the particle, right? Or changes the nature of the particle. The act of measuring or the act of observation. I always think about that even with, news photography and everything. There's just it is an artificial layer on reality. It's so fascinating. Is there
But
anything?
it is true, like if you are looking at it from the other side, if you're looking for the truth, it is sort of like this moment suspended in time that you can just you don't have access to it as a human being. You're living through time, but the photography is just like taking this sort of selection of this perfect instant that you can keep with you and analyze, and just having as a proof somehow that was there at some point. So that would be the other side of it.
And that would be the kind of truth you can access, like a regaining access to a moment in time or gaining it to a place that you never would have had access to otherwise, the feelings associated with it, the human, maybe it really is the fundamental human experience, right? Sometimes what we see in photographs is what, we're connecting human to human with what's happening to those humans or nature or whatever is happening, whatever's being depicted. But at its root, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, what is that truth that sometimes, like, you just feel sometimes, right? With a certain photograph, and you can't really, put it into words, but it is something that just feels very real and very true. And only through the photography can you access it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on photography before we move into our wrap up?
Plenty. For sure. I think, I would, if we have to think of photography, I would kind of invite the people who are listening to think of photography not so much as a document, but much more like of a space where you get to experiment and it's, for me, it's about capturing this sort of moment in time, but it's about I think I'm rambling at this point. but the intent of when you're taking the photography and when you're selecting the photography has a lot to do with like your way of looking at things, and so it's sort of a reflection of yourself. That's
Wow.
that's the way to look at it.
That's such a cool way to describe it. Thank you, Axelle. This was fascinating. Everyone, you've heard from today's thought leader in the world of photography. I'd love to hear what's sticking out for you. How might you think about things differently after what we heard from Axelle today? Axelle, any final words of wisdom for our listeners to help them activate their own nonlinear potential and see things differently?
Well, I think that it's kind of funny because I studied not just photography but different types of art form, and I see photographers who get inspiration from other photographers, but every time I'm doing one art form, I'm taking inspiration from another art form. So if you want to take better photo, maybe get inspired by music, get inspired by nature, get inspired by dance, get inspired by architecture, or well, get non-linear, I guess.
Wow, I love that. Thank you. We heard about using, photography to see, that it's for you, it's more like sculpting and it's a use of space and you have space and like even just the perception, a sense of space over like the visual experience. That was really interesting. We heard about the concept of a lie that tells the truth and treating a photo not like a document, but as a space. So I just wanted to pull all that stuff back up to remind everyone of what came up today and some more things to chew on as we close out here. There you have it, a taste of one of the incredible founding minds of the Octopus Movement. Remember to embrace what makes you weird, to unleash your own nonlinear superpowers, and join the movement for a future that blooms. That's it for today on the Octopus Podcast. Looking forward to swimming with you all next time. Thank you so much, Axelle. It was so great to meet you.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you too.